We're off to Ottawa. Our colleague Paul Wells from Maclean's magazine recently sat down with the Prime Minister to take the country's pulse at the ripe old age of 150. Here is just a portion of that interview.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
This interview is airing on Canada Day. Happy Canada Day.
Happy Canada Day.
You go back some distance with Canada Day on Parliament Hill. You lived here until you were 14. Do you have any memories of Canada Days gone by?
Absolutely. Yeah, there was always the noon shows, but I don't remember any of those. What I remember more specifically was wandering with my dad through Confederation Park, through Majors Hill Park, on the hill, looking at all the different exhibits. I remember there were trampolines set up. We got to jump on trampolines. I tried fencing for the first time with Canada's fencing team. It was just an opportunity to wander with my dad and my brothers, through throngs of happy people with maple leafs on their cheeks. And then inevitably we got to watch the fireworks from my dad's window at 24 Sussex, because we never got to be out that late.
Okay. There's a great old photo of you and your brothers on the lawn, I believe, of Parliament Hill, watching the celebrations with your dad. You've now been Prime Minister long enough to have a sense of what it's like as a Prime Minister who's a father in Ottawa. Is it different for your kids than it was for you and your brothers?
I think, sure, there are differences. I mean, social media, selfies, the kind of attention that one gets, but the substance isn't that different. I mean, figuring out how to raise kids who are grounded, despite the fact that they live pretty lucky and extraordinary lives where they get to meet presidents and kings and queens and have them be able to be normal kids with a normal family life, play basketball with them after school, help them with their homework, go for hikes that they don't want to go on in the weekend as a family. These kinds of experiences shaped my life much more than everything else, all the fanciness and the crowds, and certainly I hope that that's what's shaping their lives.
Okay. What are you celebrating this Canada Day? There's so much going on, but what does it mean to you this year?
I mean, it's strange because celebrating Canada 150 is almost by definition looking back over 150 years. We look at all this way we've come over 150 years. But that's not the way I think. I mean, yes, there's a lot to be proud of in the past, but I try to very much be focused on the future. So, I mean, the 4 themes we picked this year: diversity and inclusion, youth, environment, and reconciliation with indigenous peoples. These are all very much present and future emphases. So how we move forward on these issues, how we imagine what the next 150 years could be, is what I'm very much focused on.
Okay. You mentioned reconciliation with indigenous people. You must be aware that there are a lot of people who say there's nothing to celebrate this Canada Day. We see roadside signs that say Canada 150, Mi'kmaq 13,000, and newspaper articles that say Canada Day is a celebration of Indigenous genocide. What do you say to people who say there's nothing to celebrate on this day?
Oh, I think there's obviously different experiences over the past 150 years for a lot of people. And Canada has some very, very dark histories, from internments to turning away the St. Louis and the Komagata-Maru, but none is darker than our abject failure to respect rights, the spirit and intent of the original treaties with First Nations, Métis Nation, and Inuit peoples. We have to transform that relationship, and there's a lot of people who are rightly skeptical because over generations, despite all the good intentions from time to time, terrible things have happened. So I go into this very, very open-eyed and aware of the kind of work we need to do, and quite frankly, the work that's going to stretch over generations. If we're talking of centuries worth of a problem, of terrible things, then we're going to have to talk about generations to fix it and to work together towards it. And we've done some significant concrete things, but there's a lot more to do.
If I was a young progressive voter in Vancouver, the 3 things I'm not, and I had voted Liberal in 2015 hoping I'd have a government that would relax the rules around pot, block pipelines, and deliver real democratic reform, I would be wondering what happened to those Liberals by now. Do you worry about the weight of expectations and the weight of the disappointment that attends it?
I've actually been extremely consistent with what we promised and what we've committed to doing. On marijuana, it was never around relaxing the rules. It was always about controlling and regulating the sale of marijuana to better protect our kids from having the easy access they have now, and to take the billions of dollars of profits out of the pockets of criminals and actually put them to use in our system, whether it's in our medical system, our healthcare, or just creating tax revenue and business opportunities, whatever it is, take it out of the hands of criminals. So that's why we're doing that, and we're doing it right, and it's going to be done. On the issue of pipelines, I always said we're going to protect the environment and we're going to build the economy. We're going to do them both at the same time. And people are looking at the historic investments in an ocean protections plan for the BC coast, the Pan-Canadian framework on climate change, where we're actually going to reach our climate targets. We're bringing in a national price on carbon, and part of the way we're able to do that is we're moving forward on growing the economy in smart ways. And we did approve a few pipelines and say no to some others, and we're doing it in a responsible way.
I want to talk a little bit about the economy. The housing market, of course, is so hot now in Toronto and Vancouver and some other parts of the country, but especially there. Are you worried that a correction to that housing market could drag the whole economy down? And is this really something that the federal government has no possible levers over, or no impact over?
We do have levers, and we've used some. The finance minister move forward on some rules around mortgages that have made a significant difference. We're also moving forward for the first time in well over 10 years on a national housing strategy. You know, the federal government is investing about $11.5 billion in housing, particularly low-income and affordable housing, which is going to make a difference in those markets. We also have done the kinds of things in terms of putting more money in the pockets of the middle class that make a difference. We lowered taxes on the middle class. We raised them on the wealthiest 1%. We delivered a Canada Child benefit that helps 9 out of 10 Canadian families tax-free every month with more money than they had before, and is going to lift hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty. So these are things that are happening on a direct level that is going to have an impact on people. Yes, there are concerns about the housing markets in Vancouver, in Toronto, and elsewhere. We're trying to make sure that the economy is growing with good jobs, with good opportunities, with money in the pocket, so people can feel confident about being able to afford their homes, regardless of what the housing market does. Okay.
Your government is moving heaven and earth to get highly talented, highly mobile young knowledge workers to move to Canada. They would likely move to Vancouver and to Toronto. Is it an obstacle for them that those are such expensive cities to live in?
One of the great things about Canada is we're seeing development of hubs of really innovative success right across the country, from Kitchener and Waterloo to Montreal to the west end of Ottawa, to great work being done in Edmonton and in Calgary, elsewhere. There is a real interest in the kind of youth entrepreneurship and the opportunities to be part of the digital and the global economy in Canada. And we're taking taking a lot of people with interest in being successful. I mean, we're getting companies to invest in Canada, to expand their workforces, to do more R&D. We've had big news around AI and other things. I think people are looking at Canada and realizing we're a place that is building for the long term and for where the world's going to be.
I've heard it said that there's more work coming on addressing the sense of fairness that people are seeking in the economy, that the well-off pay their fair share. There's some talk of tax measures coming in the fall that would make it clearer that the rich have to pay their fair share. Is that something that we can look forward to?
The very first thing we did when we came into office was lower taxes on the middle class and raise them on the wealthiest 1%. And we've said that throughout, that's That's the lens at which we look at taxes and fairness on. We're going to lower taxes on the middle class and find ways to make it fair and raise them on the wealthy people. We've had a long stretch of low growth for our economy, and people feel that the hard work they've done just hasn't given them the kind of opportunities or confidence that it has for the 1% or even the 0.1%. We need to make sure that everyone's pulling their weight and doing their fair share, and Canadians get that, including the wealthy Canadians I talk to, understand that we're all better off when everyone has a real and fair chance to succeed.
Okay. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation that the young Prime Minister of Canada will lead the resistance against the Trump administration, the global resistance against Trump. And I get the impression that's actually just about the last thing you'd like to do, because Canadians are also saying, don't screw up Canadian jobs that depend on trade with the United States. Is that, how is that balancing act going?
I think I'm very much a reflection of what Canadians have told me, not just over the past year and a half, but over the past years, past decades of my childhood, of having been a teacher across the country, having met and chatted with Canadians of every possible background. People don't expect us to lecture or hector or try and shake our fist at the world. They want us to work hard, succeed, and be a good example on things that we've figured out. So whether it's figuring out how to make a strong country, a country stronger based on diversity rather than looking at weaknesses through differences, whether it's about being open to trade and knowing that that can create good jobs for people, or whether it's charting an independent course in how we engage with the world. This is what Canadians expect, and there's no sense that, oh, we have to go and pick fights around the world. It's much more of, how can we help, how can we be productive and constructive? That's what I'm going to do.